Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Everybody to the Tuesday, November 12th informational meeting. We'll call the meeting to order and start out today with some committee reports. And I believe Councilor Kiley was going to share the UDC report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The UDC met this past Thursday, November 7th. A number of items. I'll go through some of them pretty quickly. It's the last one that I'll spend a little more time on. We approved the new members of the Citizens Advisory Committee. We talked a little bit about coordinated public transit, human services, transportation plan, and the annual progress report. We reviewed the annual list of obligated projects, had another discussion on the Maple Street, Park Street corridor study report, as well as the 2020-23 Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP revision, as well as an amendment to the 2023 Transportation Improvement Program too. Then we had the long-range transportation plan market research study that was presented to us by Chris Tatum with the EDC Institute. And I'll jump to his summary from that. It was a very interesting report. Their methodology, well, first of all, the purpose was to gather objective input from the community about a wide range of issues related to the region's long-range transportation plan. And their methodology was they had more than 40 stakeholder interviews. They had conducted six focus groups. They have a statistically valid survey of residents, as well as a statistically valid survey of employers in the region. The survey of more than 200 members of the traditionally underserved populations, which was, I thought, a very good aspect of this particular research study, which involved low-income persons with disabilities, minorities, non-English speaking residents, and so on. And then they also conducted a survey of more than 200 transit users. So the summary of their findings, the ratings of the region's transportation system have declined. Some of the biggest decreases were related to street maintenance, traffic congestion, and traffic safety near schools. And he did say some of this is obviously seasonal, because much of your spring and summer is where you're going to have a concentration of your street construction taking place. 2/3 of the residents surveyed thought spending on transportation should be increased. The types of projects they are most willing to fund with their taxes are improving east-west roads in Sioux Falls, improving the north-south roads in Sioux Falls, and improving the timing of traffic lights. And I'll state, this isn't a survey just of Sioux Falls residents. It really encompasses much of Minnehaha County and Lincoln County as well. Nearly 1/3 of the employers do not think the region's road system will be able to support their freight needs in the next 20 years. And I think that's a reflection of a very rapidly growing community. Usage of alternative modes of transportation, such as carpooling, biking, walking, and motorcycle use has increased significantly since 1999. An area of traffic safety that I'm directly involved in, the motorcycling, that saw a 500% increase over that particular time. Roadways that residents think should be the top priorities for improvement. Again, 41st Street, Minnesota Avenue, which is South Dakota Highway 115, and also 26th Street. And in social media, this is another interesting summary or finding. Social media is quickly becoming the top source of information for residents about transportation-related needs. They feel that it's going to soon surpass what we get on TV, radio, and through the newspapers. Suggested guiding objectives, in other words, what should we be focusing on? Enhancing people's ability to travel throughout the Sioux Falls area, ensuring that residents can safely travel in the region, ensuring that the capacity of the region's transportation system can accommodate projected increases in population, and developing and encouraging the use of alternative modes of transportation, such as public transportation, biking, walking, and ride sharing. Then they had a list of possible seed projects. Maintenance of streets was an obvious one in the city of Sioux Falls, as well as the surrounding communities in the MPO planning area. By the way, he'd stated that our MPO planning area is now up to 272,000 people. It's the first time I've heard it in that 270 range. I've heard 260s before, but in this report it was over 270. I did state at that point in time our involvement with pavement management analysis, and especially with our infrastructure management services, the techniques where we have the vans traveling, and basically they're very objectively scanning the roadways. It's like taking an x-ray of all of our roadways throughout the city, and then compiling that information and coming up with actually a number that designates the priority of that particular roadway. And he did say that Sioux Falls is doing it right in that particular category. Improvements to traffic flow in the city of Sioux Falls, which could include intersection and capacity improvements that allow residents to travel to from major destinations in the region, including the Empire Mall, downtown Sioux Falls, East Side shopping area, and the Convention Center arena. He said, interestingly enough, and Councilors Neitzer and Brecky, you can correct me if I'm wrong, he said most often, did he say most often those complaints are coming from residents that are longtime residents versus people who have moved in? They have longtime residents that had the expectation it's only going to take me 10 minutes to get to work. Now it's going to take me 13 minutes to get to work, or 14, or whatever the case is. And then the investments in public transportation to meet the needs of seniors, low income, and other underserved populations in the region is a possible project we should be looking into, as well as expansion of the region's walking and biking system to ensure residents can safely walk and bike in the region. So those were the kind of the major points of his presentation.
Thank you, Councilor Kiley. Next, we'll hear about the Siouxland Heritage Museum Board meeting from Councilor Starr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine will be brief because I was unable to attend the meeting because I was reading about thick red stew as part of the Jump Start and Reading program that day. So I was at Annie Sullivan Elementary and had the opportunity to read it also at Cleveland Elementary. So it was one of those days where, like most of us have, where we have to make a choice. And me reading to little kids who thought I was really important was probably the priority that day. So
yeah, I did that last year. That's fun. Okay, well, thanks for that kind of report. And we'll move on to open discussion. Councilor Staley.
I wanted to say thank you to those of you who supported us in our B ordinance last week. And Councilor Brecky, I want to give you a high regards for your efforts you put into that as far as reaching out to council members, asking if they had concerns, and she worked very hard to address any input that she got from her colleagues, and that is what I call collaboration. But I wanted to bring up something that happened while I went to the bathroom last week. I left the meeting, and I ran into this guy named Tim Olson. Tim was our beekeeping expert. He came in to talk about the habitat of bees, and we used him a lot during this whole process with beekeeping. But I wanted to talk about something that we brought up a while back. It was called using our cell phones during council meetings, getting input from the public during council meetings. And here's what happened with Tim. He got up and gave his public input during the the council part when he could speak. And in the course of the dialogue between the council members about beekeeping, Councilor Erickson brought up the incident where a dog had been attacked by a bee. And Tim had given his input. He was sitting in the audience. Tim could not speak again. He had no way of getting back up here to give any more comments. Now, had I had my cell phone on, I guess I could have let Tim communicate with me, but I'm not doing that because I don't think that's fair to those people who don't have connections to us with their cell phones. So Tim was not able to say anymore. But I ran into him when I went back to go to the bathroom, and he said, Teresa, the bee incident that was referenced was a Brazilian bee. He said that is illegal in our country. We don't allow those kind of bees. And he said, I wanted to get up in the worst way and say that, but he couldn't, because you're only allowed to speak to us one time, unless you have a connection to one of us through the cell phone. If you can text us, if you are a personal friend, you can communicate with us endlessly during the meeting. But those people who don't have that connection to council members don't get to do that. So again, I think it's an issue that needs to be looked at, but I appreciated that he brought that up. And the second thing I want to do, I want to say a shout out. To our counselor, Pat Starr. I attended the Glory House Chamber event last week, celebrating that they're opening up the new edition of the Glory House, but they're also doing another appeal for more expansion. I was the only council member who was there, but none of that would have happened if it hadn't been for Councilor Pat Starr's energy back in 2016 when we got elected. He was the one who came up with this, put it forward. He kept persevering through the resistance he had received from some of the administration, and here we are with a wonderful project happening. So thank you, Councilor Starr. I'm always going to herald you as being the champion of that. So, and also the council members who voted to push that through. It was, I think, a unanimous effort. Pat, am I right? Yeah, on the part of the council to do this Glory House gifting of the property. So, thank you.
Councilor Erickson.
In regards to the comments made about Tim, I brought up that bee incident as well as Councilor Kylie and I. We both brought that bee incident up at the info meeting, which was long before the second reading. So Tim actually had multiple opportunities to talk to any of us on the council, regardless of cell phone contact. He could have, I asked him specifically when he was standing at the dais, what do you know about the transfer of bees? We talked about it. He was a little caught off guard that he didn't realize this happened in our backyard in Sturgis, South Dakota. He could have spoke about it at first reading, second reading, and also he could have emailed or called any of us on our personal calls through the city website. So the fact that he wasn't able to speak twice doesn't hold any merit in my opinion, because he had 5 or 6 opportunities to talk to us, and it passed, and we'll see what happens with it. But I just want to make sure that the public has a clear knowledge of how easy it is to contact each and every one of us and how available each and every one of us are in doing our jobs. On another topic, I'd like to just mention, yesterday obviously was Veterans Day. The Chamber puts on a veteran program at Lincoln High School. There are tons of songs. One of my favorite things that they do is they do the songs for each branch of the Army, the Marine, the Coast Guard, and each person that serves in those capacities stands up with great honor and pride and sings the lyrics, and they all shout and do their chants. Along with that was a former a veteran that spoke about his experiences and the importance of all of us sharing our stories and learning from veterans to make sure that those stories are carried down, and the importance of learning from generation to generation to generation. So it was very, very good. The Chamber does a wonderful job at putting that program together. It was well attended. Councilor Selberg and myself were both there, as well as many county commissioners and many legislators. So thank you to all the vets that have fought for our freedom, past and present, and we have an arrangement of people within the city that our veterans themselves, as well as many that have been on this council and served in many different capacities, as well as staff. So thank you to all the veterans, and we never want to take our freedom for granted. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. I'd just like to also mention, read for the record, it was my privilege to participate for the last 6 or 7 years now. But I read to kindergartners and preschoolers at John Harris Elementary. There were nearly, and I did it in 2 sections, so there was close to 70 to 75 in each section. And I was, as I'm reading it, and these little young minds that are just at the beginning of their potential now, I taught at the high school level, and you often wondered with some of your students that were lacking because of simply the environment in which they were raised in. You kind of wondered if changes could have been made in that environment when they're at this age now, that preschool age, because every child, I think, has that same potential to learn if they're just given that opportunity. But anyway, reading was extremely fun. I always love the questions and the comments. But while I was there, I was invited back at 1:30 because they had went live on Facebook because it had been announced previously that there was going to be a big reveal of a surprise, and there was this huge wrapped present in the library, and a couple of students unwrapped this large present, and it was the first book vending machine in an elementary school in the state of South Dakota. And it was done through grants that some of the teachers had noticed and applied for, as well as other people providing supporting funds for that. But a couple of the children were selected to put their gold coin into the machine and then to select their book. So the whole purpose of this project was obviously to promote reading skills, literacy, and also behavior, because they earned their gold coins by good behavior. And so after the first 2 students put theirs in, of course, one little boy, they had one classroom there in the library. Everyone else was viewing on Facebook, but one little boy said, okay, do we all get a turn now? Which obviously they didn't, but so congratulations goes out to John Harris Elementary for making use of that opportunity. And I thank John Harris Elementary as well as our staff at Siouxland Libraries for making that opportunity available to all of us. It's something that you always get, at least I get more out of it than I put into it, invest. Thank you.
Thanks, Counselor. Anybody else? Okay, we will move into the presentations. Our first one today is on light pole corrosion initiative. Welcome.
Good afternoon, councilors. My name is Nick Borns. I'm the principal engineer for water and light and power at the city of Sioux Falls. Here to talk to you today about, I guess, 2 things. Light pole corrosion initiative, and then the other thing we'll talk about is some proposed updates to Chapter 15 Engineering Design Standards, which is roadway lighting. So we'll start with the light pole corrosion initiative. I guess to begin, I'll just introduce the team that kind of worked on this. So myself and the superintendent for traffic and light and power at the city of Sioux Falls, Jerry Jongling, Trent Bruce with DGR Engineering, and then we also worked with Corrosion Initiative Focus Group. So just some background on aluminum corrosion. The city, upon replacement of light poles in different locations throughout Sioux Falls, noticed that there was corrosion happening at the bottom of the light poles. And this had happened at several different locations. The image that's up on the screen right now shows, I guess this is probably the worst example that we have of corrosion. And you can see at the bottom of the pole, the aluminum is actually corroding quite a bit. This specific example is 10 years old. The examples ranged in installation from 2003 to 2013, so not very old. These light poles are relatively new, and the examples are citywide. Just a little bit more information on this challenge background. So we also started collecting geotechnical information upon replacement of water mains. And what we found was that in the different locations where we're doing water main replacement projects, we actually found that the soil is classified as being corrosive or extremely corrosive in every situation that we tested. So again, just more verification that we're running into corrosive soils throughout the entire city of Sioux Falls. So I guess what we ended up doing was deciding we needed a two-part solution to this problem. The first part was going to be a replacement program for the existing poles. We know this is something that we're going to have to address and get these poles replaced. So what we ended up doing was partnering with DGR and South Dakota State University. South Dakota State University will provide us with technical assistance. What we're going to end up doing is we're going to determine where the worst locations are, what areas we need to target for replacement, how much life is left in these poles, maybe how many poles we'll need to target per year for replacement, and come up with a strategic plan to be able to replace these poles so we can mitigate this problem. The second part is we don't want to continue to install the same light poles the same way that we're doing it right now because we know we're having problems with them. So again, working with DGR and then with our own City of Sioux Falls staff, we did pretty intense investigation into material options, installation methods, what other municipalities are doing, and then just different manufacturer options and what costs are associated with these different options. Once we had some of that information gathered, we then worked with a focus group so we could come up with a solution that would work for everybody. So the Corrosion Initiative Focus Group, showing on the screen right now, it's kind of a collective group of basically being able to analyze this from different directions. We wanted to have contractors involved. We wanted to have consulting engineers involved. We had our own city staff involved with this effort. And then we also wanted to include developers. So this exhibit right here shows basically this is the summary of a lot of investigation and work that boiled down into, I guess, one kind of final table that we could use to really analyze our different options. And just a few things to point out on this. Option number 5 is what we install right now, the aluminum embedded poles that are 30 feet tall. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out is that what we really looked at a lot was the effective cost per year based on life expectancy. So we know what the installation is for the initial install of the poles, and then we have the life expectancy from the manufacturer, and kind of combining that into what the effective cost per year ends up being. And for our focus group, I guess the thing that really jumped out to all of us on this focus group was that the concrete bases, that option was probably the most appealing option really from the get-go. And it's because we also install these concrete bases on collector streets and arterial streets, so we've got a history with them. And we have some past installations of concrete bases that are decades old, and we know they've performed really well. So that's the option that the focus group gravitated towards immediately, and then through our discussion and investigation, we really never wavered from that option as being the clear-cut favorite. So just an example of just the visual difference. There's really, the entire light pole looks the same except for right at the ground. There's a concrete footing and then a little base that sits on top of the concrete footing, and that's essentially a junction box for connections to be made with the streetlight wires. So one of the things we wanted to be cognizant of was offsetting costs. We know that the installations are going to cost a little bit more than what the direct bury poles are. So we looked at what things we could do to offset some of these costs. And one of the things that we did was we reduced the pole height from 30 to 25 feet. And the reason we were able to do that and be confident that we would have the same light coverage is because now that we're using the LED lights, we've got better light coverage. And actually with a 25-foot, we avoid a lot of the tree canopy issues with the shading from the trees. Once we get up to that 30 feet, it's a little bit more difficult to avoid some of those conflicts. So those are kind of the two reasons that we felt comfortable with going that 25-foot route. And then I guess a couple of other reasons that, or a couple of other different things we were able to do to offset costs is that with the direct bury poles, we were going to have to start installing junction boxes because there just wasn't enough room to make the connections within the light pole. When we do the concrete bases, we've actually got that junction box that sits on top of the concrete, and we can make the connections there. So we can avoid having to have a separate junction box when we utilize this concrete base option. And then I guess the other thing that we're able to offset costs is that if we continued with the direct bury, we would have to use some sort of engineering fill to be able to mitigate some of that soil corrosion, and we can avoid having to do that when we use the concrete bases. So again, just a few more advantages of concrete bases. We're confident we're able to withstand corrosive soils with this type of installation. There is reduced maintenance. If a light pole needs to be replaced, we can actually replace the light pole right on top of the base, and we don't have to replace the entire pole into the ground and things like that. We'll also gain consistency in the installation throughout the city. Instead of just using these concrete bases on collectors and arterials, we'll also be using them on the local streets, which more installation and more contractors that will be installing these will also help to reduce the costs. And then we, as I mentioned, a smaller footprint without having to have that junction box behind the direct bury poles. I guess the only footprint is basically that concrete base. So just a quick overview of the timeline of this corrosion initiative. In September of 2018, that's kind of when our soils and corrosion investigation began. Shortly after that, in November, we teamed with DGR and SDSU on this research project. In April of 2019, we formed the focus group. In June of 2019, we presented to the Home Builders Association on what our plan was moving forward. Last week, November 6th, we were presenting our findings to the IRAB group, and then here tonight to the Council Informational group. So before I move into our proposed updates to Chapter 15, are there any questions specific to the concrete bases?
Councilor Neitzer.
Thank you, Nick. First question, obviously there are some areas with very salty soils, like for example out west where I've lived, where we've had to do water main replacements because of that, but is there any issues with the salting that we do of our roads? Do they hit the poles, and does that cause an issue or not?
There might be some effect to that, and actually that's something that we talked about when we initially began the conversation with South Dakota State University and DGR. And the things that they're going to do is they're going to take soil samples right at specific locations, and then we're going to test and see what these light poles look like at these specific testing locations. And they'll be able to really pinpoint what the culprit is. We know we have problems with just different soil corrosive nature of the soils because we have the problems, like you said, with water mains, but it is possible that chemical application could have an effect on that. We'll know more after we have some of that research completed by South Dakota State.
Okay, and you made mention of replacement. What kind of scope are we looking at? Hundreds or thousands of poles to replace, and over what timeline?
So I'll talk to Jerry about what we have for a number of poles out there. Do you know offhand? Okay, so about 4,000 poles. And as far as the replacement plan and where we need to target and how many and over how many years and how much life is left in the poles, That's all a part of that research that we're doing with South Dakota State. And then I guess the important thing for us is we want to make sure that we are as strategic as we can be about this, because we want to make sure that we are staying ahead of any problems we might have with corrosion, but at the same time, we want to be budget conscious.
Okay, so we still have to identify the scope of the problem. We don't know if that's what this is going to tell us. For example,
right?
Yeah.
Yep. So for the replacement part of it, we don't have all the answers yet, but that's what we're working towards.
And maybe finally, how far apart do light poles need to be now in a residential neighborhood?
Residential.
200 feet?
200.
Okay, and then, okay, very good, thanks.
Councillor Staley?
Well, so what I'm hearing you say is that and I don't know what my neighborhood has, I'll have to look, but there's a chance that these light poles that are in the ground are okay.
Yes.
So those could be just left alone.
Yep. Like I said, the examples that we found are ones that had been hit in an accident, and we pulled them out and just visually inspected them, and we found out we had kind of a range. Some of them, well, you saw the picture of the one that looked bad. You could see that it's corroding from the bottom. Some of the other ones weren't corroding as bad. So I think that we're going to find out that there are going to be some areas that we'll have to target for replacement. What relatively soon might mean, it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years. And there's some other areas that I think we're going to find out that there's still going to be plenty of life left in the poles.
Was this budgeted to replace some of these?
We don't have anything specifically budgeted for replacing these newer aluminum poles at this point. I guess what we want to do is identify what exactly the problem is, so we can, like I said, kind of be strategic about our replacement plan.
But are you going to, like in 2020, do you plan to you're going to use some of your money to replace these?
I don't think we'll start with a replacement in 2020, but I would assume that we're going to be starting shortly after that, soon after that.
So that's going to be another budget cycle?
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Kiley?
Thank you. Nick, the junction box, does that seal up sufficiently where it does keep the rainwater, the melting snow, maybe even some of the substances that are used on the roadway that are going to get pushed up to the base of the light by the plow? Does it seal sufficiently where it would protect the interior connections?
So you're talking about the junction box
Yes.
on the concrete bases that we're planning on installing?
Because I'm assuming that's got a panel so that you can remove and replace and to access.
I'm not sure are those watertight, Jerry? Maybe you've got an answer for that. That would be.
Hello, Jerry Donnelly, Light and Power. Yes and no. So there's water and chemicals and all that can still get inside, but we use weatherproof wire and connectors and all that. So literally, like along the interstate, all the wires and that can be sitting in the water for a month as completely waterproof. And
or sitting in water.
we do.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you. And then, so if we provide the concrete bases, that means then we can reuse that base over and over, put a new pole as needed. So if one's damaged in a traffic accident, hopefully the bolts are such that we can put a new pole over.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the big advantages that I guess that we're excited about. You know, on the maintenance side of things is we know that they work that way. We've got examples of concrete bases for light poles that we've got that are decades old, and we've done those replacements, and the footings hold up really well, and we know that we're going to have an easier time with replacement when we have a situation like that in the future too.
Especially an easier time of replacement during the winter months when the ground is frozen.
Absolutely. Yep. Very good point.
What percentage of our light poles are still, because we were using fiberglass before, were we not? And then we transitioned to the aluminum. What percentage are fiberglass, and how did the fiberglass hold up compared to the aluminum? I'm assuming that there's a reason why we transitioned from fiberglass to aluminum.
So I'll let Jerry talk about the percentages. I'm not sure what there is out there, but as far as the investigation and the material options, fiberglass was one of them that we investigated. And for a number of reasons, I guess longevity and cost, and they also kind of, they fade. They're not as visually as appealing as what the aluminum poles are. So for a number of reasons, we did go away from that fiberglass option. And when we reinvestigated these different options, that was one of them that we certainly did talk about, and I guess we ruled that one out just for the various reasons, I guess. But Jerry, you want to talk about what percentage maybe you have out there?
And I think as Jerry's coming forward, I think they were fairly susceptible to the cold temps, especially if somebody did run into them as well too, weren't they?
Yes, as far as percentage, I couldn't tell you. It'd probably be under 5%.
Okay.
We're fading them out.
Okay.
And we're not keeping them around. There's a couple issues with them. But mostly they don't last as long as we wanted to. The sun gets into the fiberglass and starts to fray a little bit. Honestly, weed whackers can, after years and years of weed whacking around the base, they can start weakening them too. So
yes,
it was a good try, and we moved on.
Okay, it was a swing and a miss.
Yes.
Okay, last question. With the aluminum, did you investigate any potential for a coating prior to a direct bury installation that would protect them?
Yeah, very good question, and we did. And ironically, there is a coating that comes with the direct bury aluminum poles. The protective coating did not protect the poles, obviously, like this. What is the implementation going to look like? And we wanted to make sure that this is a clean implementation. So what we're looking at is development construction plans approved prior to the first of the year. Will comply with the existing engineering design standards. And then anything that's, any development construction plans approved after the first of the year would have to comply with the new design standards.
All right, thanks. Any more questions, councilors? Councilor Neitzer.
When you refer to the interduct, are you talking about the electrical between poles or within pole?
It's basically going to be the conduit that, let's see here, back up to that. So it's the conduit and wire that comes up into the pole. So we require that splicing to happen at the base, not in between where the poles are at.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Anything else, councilors? Okay, looks like we're good. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Next presentation, Tom Greco with the 2020 election update.
All right, good afternoon. Tom Greco, City Clerk. I'm here to provide you a quick update on the 2020 election, and then want to discuss some other items that you'll see coming forward and a proposal that I have of my own in terms of the election ordinance. So just a reminder, April 14, 2020, regular election followed by a runoff if needed on May 5th, 2020. Key thing up there that we try to impart on folks is when that registration deadline is for each one of the elections. We encourage people obviously to make those deadlines so they could get out and vote. Looking hopefully for a higher turnout than we had last time. Typically during these non-mayoral election years, turnout is lower, but as I mentioned several months ago, we're buying enough ballots anyway, so we hope folks get out there and use them. Okay, this is what I'm going to cover, just some important, some general information, and then I want to cover key dates, important dates, primarily for candidates, but also for the public and obviously for you as the council as well. I'm not going to discuss it today, but last time I was here talking to you about the election, it was actually last April or May. There are certain things that you'll have to do as a council as we progress, and that's everything from setting the date of the election to hiring our workers, approving them, to other items to include the canvass. One thing I want to talk about are precinct changes that are going to be forthcoming, a first reading next week. There are some cleanup things that we have to do based on a recent annexation, and also in discussion with Lincoln County. We split one of the precincts down in Lincoln County because it was getting just way too large. And then I want to touch on campaign finance. Okay, just general information for the public's edification, and again, and I'll cover this at the end if I have time. We have quite a bit of information online. I want to be able to show you where to find that, but the key thing is that everything I'm discussing today, for the most part, you'll be able to find online. There are 4 offices that are up for election. I have those listed there. Then, of course, there are possible charter amendments, ballot questions, and school board races, of course, if we combine with the school board. And I will say, and I believe I mentioned this back in April, I have approached the school, the business manager at the school. We've discussed it, and I do believe that they're going to bring an item to their board within the next month or so, so that we could combine. And then the next step would be for you all to approve, in our case, an ordinance combining the elections. Okay, important dates. There's a lot up here. Again, I don't want to go through each and every one of them, but there are some key things, questions I often get asked. The first one is, when can people circulate their petitions? Key thing up there is that it's the first date at the top. The earliest you can do that, one can do that, is January 31st. That's a Friday. You don't need my assistance to be able to do that as a candidate. You could begin circulating them, and you could also file them that day, for that matter. Also, some other things to keep in mind, deadline for charter amendments. I anticipate, as in recent years, we'll probably get any charter amendments well before this, but they would have to be to our office through you 60 days prior, which is why I have February 11th. That's a city council meeting that would precede that. And then the deadline for filing nominating petitions, February 28th by 5 p.m. And from there, we go through the process of drawing for a candidate order on the ballot, and then the actual elections themselves. But please take note of some key items up there: absentee voting, again, voter registration, and how they overlap, well, not necessarily overlap, but the interplay between the regular and the runoff elections. The other thing I want to point out is Tuesday, April 28th, it's 4th from the bottom. We had some challenges. State law says that absentee ballots shall be made available no later than 7 days prior. We had some challenges getting some absentee ballots out this last election. I think you all recall that. We're taking steps this year to be able to get those out sooner, not significantly sooner. We only have 3 weeks between elections, but certainly sooner, so that we could keep up with at least the U.S. postal rate, which is essentially 2 to 3 days, depending on what part of the country. I think we have a good plan for that. I've had discussions with our vendor to make sure, or to ensure that we could get those ballots on time. And if we can't, we believe we have a good backup plan to be able to address that. So the key is having that candidate drawing the day after the regular election if we need one. And then, as I did last time, getting on the computer and putting in our second ballot order. But once we get those proofs, taking extra steps to make sure that we can start getting absentee ballots out quicker. And then, of course, Tuesday, May 19th, start of terms. That's also traditionally the installation ceremony, and then the election of chair, vice chair, and the operations committee member. Okay, so boundary changes. I'm not gonna breeze through this, but I don't want to spend a tremendous amount of time on it because they are fairly straightforward. One change will have no net effect on any voters, but the one on 213 down in the south will. But I just kind of want to orient you here to let you know what we're looking at. We have this area up here, 4-11. We are compelled to make a change there based on a recent annexation, which includes no residents and no qualified voters, no registered voters. And then that will necessarily create a change for 2-7. The change for 2-7 actually won't be an actual change because there are no people east of this boundary right now, but ultimately we're just going to move 411 down there. And then in 213, I mentioned before, it's an awfully large precinct. I've worked with the Lincoln County Auditor. She took the lead on it in splitting the precinct in two, so we'll end up having a new precinct, and I'll discuss that in a moment. Okay, 411 and 2-7. This area here in blue was recently annexed back in early September, and we noted that when we went to make the boundary changes for the precincts, it didn't quite work out the way it should have. There was really not a clear delineation. So what we did is we are proposing for precinct 411 that it ultimately just keeps on going south to 41st Street here. The reason being, because we had two options. We could extend 2-7 east with over here is the northern boundary and keep 411 above it, or just, again, make 411 go directly south. And the reason we settled on 411 going south, I discussed this with the Minnehaha County Auditor, is because 2-7 itself is a very large precinct, and in the event area to the east of it is annexed, and certainly there'll be development there. It'll get awfully large as well. 411 right now is not a tremendously large precinct. So essentially 6 Mile Road is going to be the eastern boundary of 2-7, and then 4-11 will run down to 41st as areas are annexed, and then east to the city limits. Again, that one affects no registered voters, and so there really isn't a huge concern there. Precincts 2-13, these two shaded areas up here are or were precinct 2-13, at least for Lincoln County. Lincoln County has already gone ahead and made this particular change. They essentially they did divide it right at Southeastern Avenue. So Southeastern Avenue is going to be the eastern boundary of 213, and 216 will fill out the remainder of that area. And you could see right here, there used to be close to 5,000 registered voters in that particular precinct. It was tough on the precinct polling sites, and certainly on election day, there was some, a little more waiting than is desired. So they went ahead and changed this, and all I'm asking on this, or will be asking when the proposed ordinance comes forward, is that we adopt basically the same change. I will point out that there's no change to the polling place for precinct 213 voters. However, precinct 216 now has their polling place at Spirit of Peace Church. And you'll notice that that's outside of the precinct. That's not uncommon. And, given the availability and the options that are out there, that's really the closest place that we could designate the polling place. All of these people that are in precinct 216 now, they have been notified via postcard by the Lincoln County Auditor that they have a new precinct designation for all future elections, and they have a new polling place. Well, before I move on there, does anybody have any questions about the precinct changes?
Anybody? Councilor Staley?
Let's go back to a few slides back where you first introduced, keep going. I think that's it right there. So whose districts are we talking? Are we changing anybody's district?
No district boundaries per se are changing. Now, necessarily 4-11, that boundary will change. It'll extend into this annexed area. But that would be common for other annexed areas that we've had on the outside.
Are the colors representative of our districts? Is purple Greg's district? Is that?
Generally, purple is the northwest, northeast is green, southeast is this yellowish tannish, and in the southwest it's reddish. There is a variation in the colors between the two because there are crosshatches over it showing where school district boundaries overlap.
Okay, because I thought 411 was going to be drugged down south into the yellow part, but maybe I'm not. So you're not going to drag the northeast down into the southeast?
No, but it will. You see where I had the cursor right there.
Yeah.
If this area is developed, then that would be 411, but it's not dissimilar to, say, the central district here or other areas where we have central going, into, say, the northwest district. But our districts are based on the precincts themselves, and what drives the shape of the district are the shapes of the precincts.
Is there a chance that if you go up, take your little cursor up there and take it up to the very top of the Northeast District? Okay, so how about heading over to the right? If you head to the east, is that ever going to happen in our, or would we have to be?
Well, if there's ever, as areas are annexed, and I don't know if there are plans for that to be annexed. I quite frankly don't know if there are plans for even down here, but I would assume perhaps at some point maybe it would be.
Well, because that's over in the Crystal, what is that, Pine Lake Hills area? Pat, is that, yeah, so that, you would never just kind of reach into, I mean, like, what do they consider, just township precincts?
Oh, yeah, right now this is VP2, so they are a township precinct, any folks that are in there.
And none of those people are voting in Sioux Falls elections?
Correct, and even the area that was recently annexed, it's the two park areas, there are no registered voters in them.
And then I had a question about the election, but are you gonna, did you want that now, or
I can certainly take it.
later?
I still have some more information.
Okay, I'll wait.
Okay.
Anything else? Councilor Kiley.
Quick question regarding the precincts, especially in the southeast there with the construction of the new middle school. Do you also take into account the growth that new schools, because obviously the high school in the northwest will change the picture somewhat up there too?
We definitely anticipate there will be a lot of dynamics in each one of those areas, but also remember the 2020 decennial census is coming up. So that will compel us as a city to relook at our districts, and also the state will look at their legislative boundaries. And I think a necessary byproduct of that and a good opportunity is for us, in cooperation with both of the counties, is to relook at our precincts in time, ideally for 2022.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, carry on.
All right, so campaign finance. Ordinance 38.001, which was adopted several years ago. We've actually had a campaign finance ordinance on the books since the 80s, essentially outlining or stating that we'll adopt many of the provisions in state law. Also, just a reminder that we have adopted the provisions in state law with some minor exceptions, primarily the reporting timeline and the periods for which somebody does report. So we generally follow SDCL 12-27, and remember that we do apply basically legislative office, those standards to our council members, and really for all intents and purposes that applies to contributions. And so what I have here, and this is also found on our website, is a nice detailed listing of all the due dates for campaign finance reporting requirements. Everything from campaign finance disclosure reports, the statements of financial interest, and of course some of those other statements of organization that varies based on the candidate. But we have it all laid out there. You could see that a lot coincide, so we stay pretty busy and have a pretty fair reporting period, a reporting tempo for several months. And that's derived from this particular ordinance right here, 30.005, which was most recently changed back in 2017, not the section that you're looking at here, where I had the cursor. This part down here was changed. We did add a yearly requirement for council members to submit statements of elected official statements of financial interest. But we didn't really do anything with this portion up here. But one thing I do want to point out, and I'm obviously not looking for a decision from the council because you can't do that right now, but more so guidance based on my observations over the past several years. I want to, just as history, in 2015, prior to my getting here in about November, we basically changed the election reporting ordinance. And we required in that particular ordinance now, everybody shall submit a termination statement 60 days after their particular election. And for a variety of reasons, I think that's been a problematic requirement on candidates. The other piece that I want to mention is that, yes, we do have municipal PACs, and we have no place in our ordinance that basically requires municipal PACs to report anything other than a week prior to an election. So one thing I would just like to throw out there and maybe discuss with the group is basically two changes. Number one, aligning our municipal PAC reporting timeline essentially with the candidate timeline, because then that would give you multiple reports. Now, I will say, going back and looking back to, as far back as 2006, that was the case, and eventually over time it sort of fell off, and we ended up with just one paragraph and one date that we report. I would suggest that we still have statewide PACs report just a week prior to the election, but I think municipal PACs, put them in the same, kind of on the same par as the candidate campaign committees. The other piece that I think is important here is we actually only require people to report every other year. There's no requirement for anybody, assuming they still have a candidate campaign committee or even a municipal PAC, to report, say, in 2021. There's just no, or at the end of 2020, I should say, early 2021. What I would recommend is taking this December 31st of year prior to a city municipal election and basically just saying December 31st of each year. Again, just kind of want your thoughts on this kind of stuff, because I do think it would add some parity to the two types of candidate committees, but also I think would provide for more reporting over the course of time, because that's one thing we generally haven't had an issue with, was people getting their reports in. But just my observation is I found in 2016, I'm not saying specifically with some of you, but in 2016 there were challenges, because this was the first time where every single candidate was required to submit a termination statement. Now, in the past, candidates who did not win were required to submit a termination statement, but truth be told, I've looked at past statements and not everybody ever zeroed out. So I'm not really sure how that worked, and I think it was, a well-intentioned ordinance, but what I have found is that really the only person it benefits is me, because then I don't have to track stuff after that. So that's something I am going to kind of bring up to the council again, but would like just to get your initial feedback on it. I have not talked to anybody specifically about what I just presented. I've gotten thoughts from folks, but again, this goes back to 2016. Again, it came up in 2018. I just personally think it's problematic from my vantage point. The other thing too is, if you think about it, it requires a candidate, for all intents and purposes, to spend all their money in the last week of an election. So with that, I do want to cover one more thing, and obviously we'll take some questions, whatever questions you have. We do have a tremendous amount of information out there, and I encourage folks to go and look at our website, and I'm just going to show you some highlights right now. First of all, voter registration. Clicking on any of these tiles will give you the information that you need. We obviously have information for voters, candidates, and political committees. This is a great resource, particularly for the public in general, but also the candidates themselves. And I do want to point out our election handbook. It's a PDF. It's again, I think, a great resource. It's not definitive, because I do state at the front of it, you should always go and consult law, the administrative rules, but it is an overview of kind of the most frequently asked questions that I've gotten over the years, and that the office has gotten over the years. So about 54 pages of, again, I think really outstanding information. The other thing I want to point out is I talked about the campaign finance, and you can see to the right there, there's additional information as absentee voting comes online. There's information about how to do that and other items. And of course, campaign finance, where I have all those filing deadlines that I just discussed with you. And it gives links to all the forms, et cetera. Again, we use the state forms, local jurisdiction ones where they're available. And up here, we have all of our filed reports back to 2010. We're required to keep them for 10 years. This right here actually has them back to 2008. And I will say, I'm not going to click to it right now, but it's in a very non-user-friendly format. It's in share file, and it's not very browsable. So I do want to take this one opportunity right now to draw your attention to a new tool that we have. We recently rolled it out. I do plan on coming back and talking to you more formally about this. I'm working on a handbook that I could, or a little information sheet for people. so that they can navigate it. But basically, we've transitioned all the records in the city clerk's office that we have to this program. This is part of our agenda management program that the council adopted a couple of years ago. But we do have our campaign finance documents. We have election returns, and I just want to show you real quick, kind of some of the, what you could find in it. I want to say that it's all searchable. You could search by keywords, or you could search by full text. But again, everything we have is here online, and I will be taking that URL that goes to the share file site and transitioning it to this one sometime this week. But just looking at campaign finance documents, we've looked, you're gonna have to bear with me for a moment here. You could search, really any way you want. In this case, I want to look up all municipal candidate committees. And what we've done, we've input all this data, and you have all of the candidate campaign documents going back to 2010 in this particular case. Again, I think it's a really great resource for people out there. You could essentially find whatever it is you're looking for in a very usable format. The other thing, so we have about 500 campaign finance documents out there. And then election returns, we're pretty happy with this. We provide summary and precinct level reports. Generally though, we've only had precinct level reports prior to about the 90s. So just a snapshot of that. We have reports, basically all our election returns, in this case going back to 1942. So that's about 140, 150 different election returns. And then, like I said, I'll come back and kind of give you an overview of the rest of this program. But all in all, we have about 30,000 documents out there that are accessible to the public now. And so with that, I'll take any questions that you have.
Councilor Staley?
Thank you, Tom. That looks really good.
Thank you.
First of all, just for disclosure, I did take a photo of the screen there because I believe if we're using our phones or electronic equipment, we need to tell the public what we're doing. So I took a photo of that. I'm going to put it on Facebook just to let people see the information about the timeline. Let's talk about runoff costs because there's possibly going to be a runoff. And let's just say that there's not a runoff in the citywide in my particular position. Then we could feasibly have 3 district runoffs. So I know in the past you've said runoffs are 88,000, I believe. Yeah, I think that would be the package if it was the entire city. So how does that finance go when it could be 3 different districts?
Well, I think you can generally assume the cost would be around 1/5, but that does vary, and I would have to go through and basically recalculate, because we incur most of our costs, and just try and follow me here. We incur a good deal of cost the first time around, obviously, because it's a bigger election. We need more ballots. We need to spend more money on our worker training. But if we have a runoff election, we may have, the cost will vary just dependent upon how many workers we need. Some districts have more precincts than others, so we need more workers in them. But I think, if one district was running again, I think it would be fairly safe to assume it would be around 1/5 of the cost.
And the cost again was?
80 to 90,000.
No, but that's the runoff. We're going back to the original cost.
The original cost, I think next year I have budgeted close to $100,000.
I thought it was more than that I thought it was for the first time around.
Around 100,000. And I'll get you that exact figure.
Okay. Well, so could be 20,000 for each, like for Councilor Neisert's if he.
It could be, but again, I think we'd have to go through and run the numbers, but definitely at least.
Okay, and then when you're talking about these reporting, getting these campaign reporting deadlines implemented more stringently, that's about transparency. So people understand who's giving money for which candidate and for which issue that is on the ballot. So I want you to tell us the difference between a municipal PAC and a political committee.
So a political committee is the general term for, it lumps together political action committees, candidate campaign committees, and ballot action committees.
So is that a municipal PAC? Because you mentioned municipal PACs
Right.
are apparently not listed on there anywhere now?
I'm not following on.
Well, because you said municipal PACs right now only have to be reported right before the election.
Right.
But political committees are being reported in January.
Correct. So for candidate campaign committees, they report as of December 31st of, prior to an election year, so the first week of January.
So, for example, I know our mayor Joel Dykstra is the chairperson of his committee. What's it called? It's, well, we talked about it before. So it was Ken Hagan's campaign fund, and he is actually, I've seen him advertising to get more contributions into this. So that, I'm thinking that would be a political action committee.
Correct.
So when does his committee have to report?
Right now, the way our ordinance is written, it would be the week prior to the election.
Oh, so it doesn't come out in January?
Right, and that's why I think this is this would put it online. There would be no wondering when campaign finance reports are going to be coming in. It would make the candidate ones, the PAC ones, essentially the same.
So what if just supposedly, Paul Tenhagen's, it's called something like Citizens for a New Era or something. Let's just say that he gives some money to Councilor Neitzert during his campaign. Then we wouldn't know about that contribution to Councilor Neitzert until right before the election?
No, that's incorrect. You would know because Councilor Neitzert or whomever the recipient was, if it was more, they would have to report it because PAC donations are spelled out in the disclosure.
In right. Councilor Neitzert's, okay. So you're planning on making this into an ordinance that we're going to be voting on? I mean, this could be implemented.
With the council's help.
So, okay. I think that's not great. I think that's, and then one more thing. You said that, I will say as a candidate and newly elected, there's so many things coming at you, and I appreciated your help after I got elected about some of those deadlines. And of course, we had some candidates in the last round who didn't make the deadline to get their petitions in. So one thing I'd say is telling people if you're going to run, stop in and visit with the city clerk's office.
Yeah, we're happy to sit down with you.
Yes, that's what you really do need to do that, so you get a roadmap of what those deadlines are going to be. And then I was interested when you said it used to be that, or maybe it still is on the books, that if you lose, you're supposed to file another report.
Right, that's currently on, yeah.
So the people who don't do that, what enforcement do you have over there?
We have a $50 a day fine up to $3,000, and I've sent letters out, so, and people pay it.
People who lost, you mean?
If you don't turn any campaign filings not turned in on time, it's a $50 per day fine.
So you want to eliminate that?
Well, yes. I mean, ideally, folks get them in on time. I mean, it hasn't been a problem, but it has happened.
Councilor Erickson?
Thank you, Tom, for the presentation, and I concur with what you're looking at doing. As a candidate, I had money left over, and I didn't want to just spend it for the sake of spending it. It was just really silly for me to have to do that, and so I rolled mine over into a PAC as well. And so I have, I don't know, a couple $1,000, I don't know, maybe $1,000, something like that. I don't even know what it is at this time, but it's just silly to have to expect someone to just spend it for the sake of spending it. So I rolled it over that I can then write it to other candidates, I can give it to charity, I can use it for travel if I choose to go to a conference that isn't covered by council, things of that nature that are city related. I can use it on that. And so and reporting it at the same time seems to make sense for those timelines of having everyone need to report it at the same time. I think makes sense. Councilor Kiley and I were the only two that were imposed under the old rules to where we had to either terminate and zero it out or start a PAC. And so I would support it for everyone being on kind of that same area and not forcing people to spend what they don't need to spend. So thank you for your presentation, and I certainly support what you're doing.
Councilor Kiley?
Thank you. And I do agree that I think a change in this area is beneficial in terms versus requiring them to liquidate it or close it out, because I think, number one, it could potentially lead to a candidate needlessly spending that money and maybe even using it to fund expenses that they had. Whether you can prove they had those expenses or not, I'm not certain. That's where it gets very blurry in terms of the transparency, and it leads to that. Well, I can use it for expenses past or future. In my case, like Councilor Erickson, I formed a PAC and named it something along the lines of promoting a successful community, and then every dime that was left over has gone to a charity. And so it's currently at zero, and as soon as I can figure out how to report that on the form that you provided for me, that will be submitted, including a copy of the checks that went through the bank too, illustrating just exactly where each and every dime went. But so if there's anything, if I have any political aspirations in my future, I'll start all over again from scratch. But it seems like there could be an easier solution to that, where we just can, if we elect to keep it in the form that it was in, that we do so, and we just report on it yearly. So I do encourage changes there, and any other insights that you have in between now and then, I'm open. Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Neitzer?
And one other word in the matter of transparency, and this isn't to intimate that there's anything nefarious about PACs. They're completely legal if you follow the rules. But it does encourage people to either spend the money, which may be frivolously or whatever else, or roll it into a PAC. And what would be more transparent if they're carrying the money along as an account that's, so-and-so for council, where it's very obvious whose account it is, versus you roll it over into a PAC and you can call it like, the Tomorrow Forever PAC. And well, what does that mean? And now you got to go look it up and try to figure out who is behind it. It's just a name. It's obtuse and it doesn't really tell you. So, if they're going to carry the money, at least then because as an example, state legislative candidates can carry that money along, and so you might see so-and-so for House donate to somebody else's campaign. Well, it's pretty obvious who donated. It's very clear, versus if it was rolled into just a generic sounding PAC name that really doesn't mean anything. So I think it would be a good thing.
Okay. Anybody else? Councilor Brecky?
A little remedial help. Tell me again why the municipal PAC, as it currently exists, isn't a state PAC. Is there a separate ordinance that created it?
Well, state law recognizes statewide PACs.
Okay.
And if it's and to kind of, make it as straightforward as possible, if it's not a statewide PAC with a statewide purpose, you don't register it with the state.
Okay.
Same thing with the candidate committee.
When did we start allowing municipal PACs in the first place? Has that been always something that was always there?
I would say probably, at least from what I can tell, I believe around 2002. But I could get that information. Because as I mentioned before, we had a very specific reporting timeline for them. And that actually included at the time statewide PACs.
So they've always been something separate that the city allowed?
Yes, yep.
And is it just like Sioux Falls that has them because of our charter form of government, or is it a common practice in other cities as well?
I actually have not looked at that. They used to have, they don't have it anymore, but they used to have on the forms provided by the state, you know, one of the check boxes was Municipal Political Action Committee, County Political Action Committee. Those are not on there anymore, mostly because it's something basically up to the municipality. But yeah, we've had them for quite some time. I don't think there have been a tremendous number of them, but we have had them.
Okay, and then but they've really been just kind of unregulated. They've just been there. Because I like your suggestion of dropping them in, you know, into a category that's similar, you know, and managing them. But I'm just trying to, you know, understand kind of the history of it.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, they still follow us, you know, primarily the statewide rules for PACs, but they're just not a statewide PAC. Register with the Secretary of State.
And so our requirement to this point has been that they just have to be zeroed out, or?
No, we actually really haven't had any requirement for municipal PACs or any PACs other than provide a campaign finance disclosure report the week prior to an election.
Okay, and that's what you're hoping to cure.
That's what I'm trying to
get them
address
to
here.
fit a place where they fit and
Yep.
where they're
because they're still providing reports for the statewide PACs. They're still reporting at the state level unless they meet other criteria, like if they report to the IRS or the FEC. But for municipal PACs, we don't have anything similar.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Anybody else? Councilor Neitzer.
So with this upcoming election, if there was a municipal PAC out there and it had no activity, it didn't, let's say, donate to any candidates, do any issue, nothing, does that PAC have to file after this next election and then 2 years later the next one, regardless of how involved it is in that election, if any?
What I'm proposing is that for municipal PACs, they would have to report. Statewide PACs that donate, they already do, and they have for years. I mean, I think it goes back maybe to the 90s, if not earlier. They do provide that report the week prior. But that's only if they expended funds in the course of a campaign affecting the municipal election.
Well, so what I mean is today, the way in which it's written today, what does the existing municipal PACs, when do they have to report?
It would be the week prior to the election. The deadline for PACs right now is what any candidate running next year, their deadline would be the week prior to the election. So it's due within 3 business days, the Monday, 1 week prior to an election.
So the way it stands now, a municipal PAC essentially reports once every 2 years?
If there's only a regular, yes. If there's a runoff, then maybe twice.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor Starr?
Well, I wouldn't mind weighing in on that. I think it's not enough time for the public to find out who's giving to that municipal PAC before the election. So yes, you give the individual, that municipal PAC could give to multiple groups, but you don't know who gave to the municipal PAC. So I could give $10,000 to the municipal PAC, and then that money could be given to individual candidates, and the public wouldn't know who gave to the PAC. I made that a lot more confusing than I intended it, but it doesn't take much if I can figure out how to give more than the campaign limit I can give as an individual, as well as I don't want it to be known until a week before the election. And in the rush of things going on, that gets lost in that, and it just seems easier to follow the same deadlines that a statewide PAC or individual candidate campaign committees would make. It really could be nefarious if you were trying to hide money, which I'd never accuse anyone of, but that possibility exists too.
Yeah, and this would
I'm
put
not sure that I weighed in
candidate.
exactly what I want, but I want more reporting than just the week before or 7 days before the election. So, or I think that in transparency would make a lot more sense. Because that's the whole reason that we have reporting deadlines, is so that the transparency is there, that if you're going to give someone, make that contribution, then the voters have an opportunity to know who made those donations. And if you pack it all at the end, it gets lost.
Yeah, same schedule as candidate campaign committees.
That would be the easy way to say it in a short, brief amount of time. So thank you.
Anybody else? Well, Tom, you always do a great job of being on the ball for all this. Your preparation is amazing. So thanks for your efforts. I certainly support the changes. I think they make sense. Two quick things, whether it's on the topic or not. How many people do we generally have helping for elections, like working precincts?
Through election night, around 245 people, just at the precincts, probably around 210, 220. So a lot.
Have a good pool of folks to, I mean, is it hard to get enough people, or do we have plenty of people that?
It's challenging. There are certainly plenty of people out there who want to help and volunteer, and it's not volunteering, you do get paid a stipend. But it is challenging for some precincts, and in some cases we do, per state law, can go outside the precinct to pull an election worker in if we've exhausted all other means.
Okay, gotcha. And what is, I was looking on timelines here too, when, if you're running, is the first day you can put signs out again? Campaign signs?
As you may remember, we changed our sign ordinance. And I probably should come back to you, perhaps with planning on this. You're allowed to put those non-commercial signs out for 60 calendar days per year per property. But I think it'll probably be worth having some experts come in and talk about that a little more. It's different than our previous ordinance, which specifically identified political campaign signs, where you could put them up 60 days prior and you had to have them down 7 days after. I think this one is still fairly straightforward, but there may be some questions. All right.
All right, sounds good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we will now move on to our parking ramp discussion, follow up on some of the questions that came forward. I don't know, are we having somebody present on this, or are we just starting a discussion? Anyone? Come on up. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Dave Bixler, budget analyst. We're going to have Tom Greco, the clerk, pull up a document to speak to.
Okay. Thank you.
Well,
yeah, let's.
well, okay, so here,
open discussion.
I thought maybe there would be somebody here from, well, we do have someone from finance. Now, we were lucky. First of all, let me say thank you to those council members who voted to have a deferral on this, so we were able to do a little more investigation, so to speak, on what exactly this 1.5 million will be used for. And as I'm hearing from the public, they want to know. They don't like the fact that we're just going to give a blank check of 1.5 million to the administration. They want us to ask questions. They expect that from us as the people who are handling their finances. So I'm grateful that we were given that opportunity. However, it was kind of a time crunch because nobody was around yesterday on Monday, no meetings. So some of us gave some questions. That was good. I'm hearing from the public. Of course, it's kind of a short turnaround, but we were able to go on a little tour this morning. And I also asked Dave Bixler to kind of retool the numbers because last week, Sean, nothing against your presentation, but I wanted it spelled out in the exact amount, the monetary amount. So we went through with the Journey Group, and they had this sheet that you see here. And so I said to them, I said, hey, can you spell this out? And I'm going to quote the words of our former mayor, Mike Huther, in a 7th grade understanding. He used to say that all the time. I'm not sure we really got the 7th grade level here. But we've got $304,000, and I would ask Counselor Starr and Brecky to chime in. Maybe Counselor Neitzer knows the answers too. But general changes in scope, $304,000. Now, I wrote down in my notes, this is temporary adjustments to prepare for future elevator usage in that. And I did take some pictures. You know, you go through the facility, is beautiful inside, but you can see that there are holes that need to be filled for safety purposes, if nothing else. But so we've got infill openings at ground level, installation of conduit below the concrete slab to allow running utilities to retail space, modifications to piping, discharge stormwater from the facility, and upsizing drains. So that's the definition on that. And then the mechanical engineering, and well, back to the first one. Anybody have something to add to that? And Kurt, I see you're here. Can you give us any more clarification on the 304,000? And anything else to add?
I don't know that I can try to answer any specific questions, but I don't know what to add.
Any other clarification? Okay. Hang tight, Kurt, there. Okay, then the mechanical engineering and plumbing modifications, $50,000. And we had a conversation about generators. And a question that was asked by someone with, I don't know which council member asked it, but we said, do the other parking ramps have generators in our facility? And now my understanding is that they don't. There's battery operated power happening, but according to this new code, we have to have a generator. Kurt, am I saying that right? And then someone had said, well, can't we use a less expensive battery until we get feasibly a developer involved with this? And then apparently that's going to be too expensive to put that in and redo this. So we're going to, Kurt, maybe you could answer this. Is this generator they're proposing, is this what would be in place if a development happens? This is the end-all generator?
No, my understanding, it is sized for the requirements of the ramp only. So if a developer would come in, they would have to upsize the generator to accommodate our needs plus their needs.
Okay, thank you. Civil modifications, this is $750,000. Now, this was, excuse me, let me make sure, yeah, 62. That is landscaping, moving the ground, putting in some sidewalks so people can actually walk along the area. And Dave Bixler, if I'm missing something, any of you guys who were there?
I would jump in on that
Okay.
one. That was not for landscaping. That was really just
Well, it was
earthwork and leveling things out so that it's, to cover things up to make it safe, and then to, really to open 10th Street back or up and the, provide the sidewalk.
Well, I think they were going to put some grass in there.
Nope.
Yeah, well, Sean?
That's not what I heard. I thought it was just dirt.
I thought I heard they were going to make it just so it was appealing.
Functional.
So there's not going to be any grass in there. Okay, that infill development openings, 751,000. And again, we got the vestibule construction around development elevator shafts. We got the elevator issue up at the top too. Now we're talking about the elevator shafts, closing of openings in the upper levels, additional structural supports, capping of exposed stairwells, modification for hanging the precast exterior facade components. Now, what is that? I guess that was one that I was wondering. Exterior facade components, what does that mean, Kurt?
So when we were standing on that top floor, there Tony with Journey Group was explaining that the next floor wasn't there, which would have been the first floor of the hotel. Those structural elements of the hotel would have accommodated the precast and the facade for the top of the ramp where it transitioned from the ramp to the hotel. Since there is no first floor of the hotel there, structural modifications need to occur to accommodate that precast and facade so we can finish our ramp.
So they're putting the panels in, or they're taking them out?
We had to do additional precast to cover up the top floor of the ramp. So there would be additional precast and structural elements to accommodate the precast.
And then if a developer did come in, those would have to be taken down?
That would have to be determined by a structural engineer at that point.
Okay, so 467,000, and then, yeah, because I had landscaping down, Councilor Brecky, underground utilities. Then demobilization, removal of the construction crane and demobilization of the concrete contractor. That's, that one was 467,000, and that was one that I guess we had the most debate about at the end. On the crane cost, apparently it was $190,000 to remove the crane, and then this demobilization of the concrete contractor is $240,000. Kurt, could you explain what that meant again?
I don't have the specific breakout of those two costs, but the removal of the construction crane, if you were down there or can visualize the crane, the tower crane coming up out of the project earlier this summer, it was set up to build the ramp plus the hotel. So it was literally positioned in the middle of the ramp. Had the crane been left in place, you couldn't drive cars into the ramp because the crane was in. So when the crane was no longer needed, the developer was not going to use it. The crane had to be tore down and demobilized from the site.
Right, I got that, but how about, I'm talking about the demobilization of the concrete contractor.
The PT contractor built in efficiencies into completing both projects, bought materials, plywood, scaffolding forms, and included efficiencies between both projects. If you can spread those costs out over 2 projects instead of 1, they had additional costs that they didn't recoup with building the hotel. So there was a cost with additional cost with the formwork, demobilizing that equipment earlier than anticipated.
Of 240,000 is what we kind of came. So has the crane, a removal of the crane, been paid?
That would be a question for Journey.
That was, we had that discussion. Nobody seemed, I guess we need to know if that's been paid or not, because there was a question as to whether some of these things have already been paid. So I still am asking that. That's still a question.
We have not paid Journey for that expense. Now, whether or not Journey has paid the crane company, I can't speak to that.
And then another question that someone asked me was, did we have a performance bond on this deal when we started it? Was there a required performance bond? And maybe Councilor Neitzer, maybe you know, because you were kind of involved in the ground level of this. We don't know if there was a performance bond involved.
Performance bond with Journey Group as the...
Well, and the whole project, yeah.
The performance bond would be with Journey Group.
Okay. Was there?
Yes.
So what does that mean?
I'm not an expert on performance bonds, but they are in place to protect the work that's done, that if there was, the work's completed and down the road is not satisfactory, we can go back and require, if Journey disappeared, we could go back and go out on the bond and have corrections made.
Anybody else have any questions?
Counselor Starr?
Yes, Kurt. This is the first time you've answered questions on this project for us, so if we could back up, just tell me what your role is in this project, and did you draw the short straw that you got stuck coming this afternoon?
I didn't anticipate talking. I was here for light and power support and just stuck around to hear the conversation. I got involved a little over a year ago when we had an engineer who was a project manager left the city, left town, and I was asked just to sit in as kind of an engineering representative to be on the project once in a while, be just the engineer representative, I guess.
Did we have any other vendors, I guess, or subcontractors who we checked with to see if they had any demobilization expenses? I've heard from other contractors they've either bought additional equipment. I think Mr. Nelson talked to us about the concrete contractor was anticipating having both jobs. A lot of the things that you talked about, you know, that I think there were a lot of subs that bid on the ramp part of it, anticipating that it was more likely for them to be part of the further development, the hotel part of it. And so why would one sub in this case be reimbursed for the demobilization when there were other subs who've made investments and things? Do we check with them to see if there's other subs that have that, or did this sub come forward and specifically request payment?
I don't know all the details. I would say a majority of the subcontractors are local companies and had very small percentages compared to the PT contractor that's from up near Minneapolis.
I'm going to reserve my questions for 7 o'clock to see who's going to show up that could answer it rather than putting Kurt through this.
Thank you, Kurt.
Anybody else have any questions? Okay. We'll wrap that one up then. We will move down to public input if anybody has anything on the topics we brought up today. Doesn't look like it. Okay, we will adjourn. Thank you.